Say yes.
It's just one word.
Okay, what you're doing there is jumping. You just jumped. But never mind. Say apple. Apple.
Before we get started, I just wanted to thank everyone for all of your support so far on this journey into the cosmos of YouTube nonsense. In celebration of the continued and growing success of the channel, and partially spurred on by the Far Cry 4 video getting demonetized because I said the C word, I have now finally launched channel memberships. Hooray, woo, etc. There's only one tier and it's at the cheapest rate that YouTube would let me set it to. Other than my eternal thanks and respect, members will be able to access future videos 1 week before all you other scrubs, before the general public, and you'll also get a shout out on each video.
Nothing sexual.
However, if you'd like a free shout out on at least one video, then just answer the trivia question on the screen of text that flashes up for a few frames. No one won it last time, but Nevada Cowboy 576 came closest, so they get a shout out today. Well done you. For any newcomers to this particular corner of YouTube, first of all, sorry about the mess, I can't afford a cleaner yet. Secondly, this is part 7 of a series of videos ranking all of the main Far Cry games, with each game getting its own video, and I then put them in my order of preference, which is currently looking like this. I also did the same thing for all of the Assassin's Creed games if you really wanted to kill a few hours. Now, I've been looking forward to finally tackling Far Cry 5 for a couple of reasons. One is that this is the first entry in the series that I bought on release but never finished. See, this thing came out in 2018, about 2 weeks before God of War came out, which I was excited enough about that I bought the God of War PS4 Pro and then forgot about Far Cry 5 completely. I did try to play it again at some point but gave up partway through, though I'll get into the reasons for that later on. The other reason I've been looking forward to playing this game is the shift in public perception over time about it. This is fairly common in video games, but I found it so much easier to find examples of this with both the Far Cry and Assassin's Creed series. A new game comes out, a very vocal portion of the audience hate it because it's not as good as the previous games, then the next game comes out and that one sucks because it's not as good as the previous one. You know, the one they hated but now they seem to enjoy. This is a much broader topic which I'm sure people far more intelligent and intelligible than me could cover properly, but you will always prefer the games you played when you were younger because that's just how nostalgia works. Oh, what's that? This game you've played for just about 10 hours isn't as enjoyable to you as the one you've sunk 200 hours of co-op into over the past 3 years? Yeah, no shit, you have no emotional attachment to it yet. I put a poll up on the channel before I started writing this, which deliberately had no middle ground. Is Far Cry 5 great or rubbish? A surprising number of people actually voted on that, and thank you very much for doing so. But interestingly, what we're left with is a result that was much closer than I expected, with the option for it being a great game only just edging out in front. Now, I put this poll up after I completed the game for myself, so I already had my own opinions on it. But the public perception of these games is a part of the overall story when discussing the series. Before we go any further, I have had more than one comment telling me about how great the arcade mode is in Far Cry 5. So just to temper expectations from the off, I don't give a fuck about user-created content, it just doesn't interest me. I tried it a couple of times during my playthrough because they really don't let you forget that it's there, and it just doesn't tickle my fancy. I didn't do any co-op either, but that's mostly because I don't have any friends, though my wife has said she does want to buy this when it's next on sale so we can have a go at the co-op mode. But again, that's another topic and I'm not here to get into that. I just want to set expectations for the people hoping to see me gush about the arcade mode or the co-op. The former doesn't interest me at all, but I can certainly see how people can sink 200 or 300 hours into it, and the latter does seem like a perfect fit for this game, but I haven't tried it yet, so I can't talk about it. There are some interesting tidbits of information about this game's development and release to get into though. Well, interesting to me at least. Once again, we have what seems to be the core Far Cry development studios involved with this one, with the project being headed up by Ubisoft Montreal and Toronto, but this time both studios are listed as developers rather than Toronto's usual listing as a support studio. Other familiar names return from the last few games, like Ubisoft Shanghai and Kyiv returning as support studios, with Ubisoft Reflections being listed again for the first time since Far Cry 3, which might explain why I enjoy drifting down country roads so much all over Hope County. Once again, however, the specifics of each studio's involvement eludes me, despite my best efforts, but based on previous entries in the series, we can at least guess as to who did what. Reflections most likely helped out with the vehicle systems, because that's what they did on Far Cry 3, and they did make the driver series, which I seem to remember does feature a fair bit of vehicular gameplay. Shanghai previously worked on Animal AI and the hunting missions, so I guess they maybe focus on the animals again in this one. And Kyiv developed the PC version for Far Cry 4, so I imagine there's similar duties here, which does leave me guessing as to who developed the arcade tools and the co-op features. Historically, the multiplayer aspects have been handled by Massive Entertainment in Far Cry 3, those are the people that just released that Star Wars Outlaws game, and Red Storm Entertainment in Far Cry 4. With neither of those studios being listed here, I'm going to assume that Toronto handled this stuff, as both the arcade and co-op modes are such prominent and integrated features in this game. Maybe the amount of work they did earned them that co-developer credit seen here. Then again, I'm probably completely wrong about all of that, but please do feel free to correct me, because I am interested in this sort of stuff. What is also largely unclear, like with other games in the series, is why they decided to go with this setting and narrative in particular, rather than any of the other locations and storylines that they must have floating around in the ideas room. I do remember the announcement of Far Cry 5 surprising me with its Montana setting. One of the key features of Far Cry games is being set in an unusual and often unique place, so on the face of it, a US setting is pretty generic. But then you realise that this isn't New York or LA or anywhere like that we've seen hundreds of times. Other than that one area in San Andreas, we haven't really seen an area like this in a more modern setting before. Except maybe Farming Simulator, but I've not played those games. Please do let me know if you'd like me to do a ranking series of those games in the comments, and I'll go get myself booked in for a lobotomy. It does seem like the setting of the game was in part dictated by the narrative basis of separatism. Creative director Dan Hay began writing the story in late 2014 and wanted to reflect on the general tension in the air felt throughout his childhood during the Cold War. He felt that this continued into the 21st century with the whole war on terror thing and the related terrorist attacks, coupled with a financial crisis that started in 2007 and feels like it's never really stopped. Dan, or Mr. Hay to you and me, felt that this pushed some people to become more protective of their families and way of life, and increase their questioning and opposition of government decisions. When you have a group of people who are already suspicious of the government and the outside world and just want to be left alone, you have the perfect opportunity for a powerful group to come in and convince them that they have their interests at heart. They just need to do what they say and they'll be fine. Apparently they, whoever they are, as we know that each game has been worked on by different people, have had the desire to set a game in the United States for a while now, and apparently saw Montana as a remote frontier that not many people were aware of, making it a setting in keeping with the locations from previous games and an ideal setting for a county that just wants to be left to get on with things themselves, becoming the target of religious extremists that want things done their way. Ubisoft had also decided that they wanted several antagonists in this game, rather than just one like in Far Cry 3 and 4, which again a cult lends itself to pretty well, as while there is always the one main leader, there's usually always the inner circle that can be just as dangerous and influential. I've half watched enough Netflix documentaries to know that much, at least. Apparently Far Cry 5 was the fastest selling entry in the franchise and doubled the sales of Far Cry 4. It is also the second biggest launch of any Ubisoft title, according to Wikipedia, making $310 million in its first week, being outperformed only by The Division, of all things. God, who the hell talks about that game anymore? I'm gonna go through the story in one dedicated section this time, because I normally scatter it throughout the video and people keep complaining to me about spoilers, even though I say I'm gonna discuss spoilers. So I'll put a spoiler warning here and a timestamp to show you when I'm done talking about the story. Those Netflix cult documentary comparisons I made earlier are on full display as the game opens up, with what looks to be a retrospective documentary about Eden's Gate, a group of people extremely keen on Jesus who have taken over a Montana place called Hope County. They started by buying up all the land and taking over local services, preaching about something called the collapse and gouging out the eyes of someone filming a sermon on their phone, setting them up as clear villains. Well, that and the giant statue of their leader that we then pass in our helicopter. It also seems like the area is cut off from communicating with the outside world, as the video we are streaming on our phone on our way to the mission is lost. We take on the role of a deputy in the Hope County Sheriff's Department. Now, I don't fully understand how the American police system is structured. I had it briefly explained while I was in Virginia recently that there's something like the local police and then the sheriffs and then the state troopers. Maybe, I don't know, around my way we have the police and that's pretty much it, unless you're really in trouble and then you get the police with guns. Anyway, despite that intro video saying that Eden's Gate owns the police in Hope County, we are a part of the Hope County Sheriff's Department that apparently isn't corrupt. Along with us are two other deputies, our heavily mustached sheriff and a US Marshal, flying our way into Hope County with an intent to arrest Joseph Seed, the head of Eden's Gate, on charges of kidnapping with intent to harm. I mean, we've also just seen a video of him gouging out another man's eyes, but I guess that's not enough for suspicion of murder? Not even manslaughter, maybe? The US Marshal is feeling pretty confident about this operation, but the sheriff and his deputies are fairly scared. They obviously know what Joseph Seed and his followers are like, and try to convince the Marshal that this is a pretty bad idea, which does seem like a discussion you should maybe have before getting in the helicopter. Our character is pretty chill though, because we play a mute protagonist that we eventually get to customize. While we've had a mute protagonist before, they at least had a name, backstory and appearance. Here though, we are referred to as either Rookie, Rook or Deputy throughout the game, never speak, and fully customizable in terms of sex and appearance. Now please do keep in mind that I did really enjoy this game much more than I thought I would, but in my opinion it does have its problems. These things may not be a problem for you, which is fine, we're allowed to think different things without falling out. However, my opinions are actually correct, and it is in fact you who are wrong, so please do keep that in mind before you angrily comment. But I don't think that a silent protagonist was the right way to go with Far Cry 5. I'm not against silent protagonists in general. I mean, Half-Life 2 is one of my favourite games of all time, but even that series showed that sometimes it can become infuriating. What I wouldn't give for a button to tell Alex just to piss off for a minute so me and her dad can have a bit of a chat about the G-Man. Far Cry 5 features several instances where people talk directly to you, asking you questions, creating situations where it makes no sense that your character doesn't say anything back to them. That one scene where John Seed is trying to convert you just made me laugh with how painful it is that we can't talk. Back in Storyland, we are treated to what could now be considered the standard Far Cry opening section. We come face to face with the main bad guy who gives off very creepy and intimidating vibes before we have to run away in a hail of bullets. We arrest Joseph, who comes willingly, but his followers clamber all over the helicopter, literally throwing themselves at the rotor blades to stop him being taken before we crash, get separated from our buddies, and have to run away in a hail of bullets. We end up unconscious and being rescued by a man resembling Mike Ehrmantraut called Dutch, who lives on Tutorial Island and gets us to grips with the main mechanics of the game. Part of this involves activating a radio tower so that Dutch can communicate with other resistance members off the island, and in the first of several meta commentaries assures us that we won't have to climb towers all over the county, though we do climb several towers all over the county. Dutch tells us that our attempt to arrest Joseph has been interpreted as his prophecies finally coming true, so now the cult are stepping up their purging of non-believers, preparing for this collapse that he's been preaching about. Dutch then explains to us that the county is split into 3 districts, each overseen by one of Joseph Seed's heralds. One is looked over by Jacob Seed, who runs and trains the cult's military forces. The other is taken care of by Faith Seed, an adopted sister who, as far as I can tell, runs the production and distribution of a hallucinogenic drug called Bliss, which keeps the population sedate and suggestible. finally, there's John Seed, who seems to be head of public relations by creating positive propaganda and making the cult seem totally cool and hip. No, seriously, you guys. Conveniently, or inconveniently, depending on your point of view, each of these heralds has managed to get their hands on one of our buddies from the intro, so it's up to us to get out there, save our friends, and bring down the heralds ready to take on Big Daddy Joseph himself. I do quite like this setup for the story, and when you're out and about in the world, it really does feel like you're in an oppressed and monitored place. Each district is like its own self-contained story, a technique Ubisoft would repeat on a larger scale with Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I'll get into the effect this has on gameplay later, but this did have a negative effect on the story for me because everything I'd done previously had no impact on what I was doing next. And each area has its own set of characters and stories, which made it hard for me to remember who anyone was before completing their arc and moving on to the next, never to think about them ever again. There's also that trope about villains not taking the opportunity to easily kill the protagonist, which happened far too frequently throughout this game for my liking, but in certain ways Ubisoft do attempt to make it make sense. It's later revealed, extra special warning, that Jacob is training you to kill the militia leader, and he even says that we are the only person who can achieve that. So that does make sense as to why they wouldn't just kill us while we sat in a cell. But let's say you do that district first and kill Jacob before any of the others. Now you've killed Joseph's older brother, dented the effectiveness of their armed forces, and now you're going after his younger brother and adopted sister. Why doesn't he just kill us? But then again, he doesn't react to any of that stuff because the story is split into 3 parts that can be played in any order, so they are all independent of each other and have no effect outside of their own isolated narratives, which I personally think is a great shame and missed opportunity, but I'm gonna come back to that later. So anyway, you roam around Hope County freeing your friends and killing the heralds until Joseph calls you out to meet him face to face.
Nothing sexual.
You meet him outside the very same church where you tried to arrest him at the start of the game, and he reveals that he has successfully hypnotized all of your buddies that you've made throughout the game, and they are now holding the surviving members of the sheriff's department at gunpoint. Here you are given a choice. You can either walk away with your pals and forget any of this ever happened, or you can try and kill Joseph Seed. Far Cry 5 continues the infuriating newer tradition of only having one save slot, so I had to look up on YouTube what happens if you walk away. You get in the car and drive off, the sheriff turns on the radio, which is playing the same trigger song that Jacob programmed into you, and the screen fades to black. Glad I didn't waste my save file on that ending. The ending most normal people would choose, the one that clearly leads to more gameplay, sees you fight Jacob in a weird vision sequence, which is something else I'll talk more about later, seemingly also fighting for the very freedom of your buddies too. He eventually relents as nuclear explosions start going off all over the place. I've since read somewhere that radios throughout the game have been reading out stories about how the rest of the world is going to shit while you're dicking around in Montana, so apparently this doesn't quite come out of nowhere, but I certainly expected a bit more warning or foreshadowing about this sort of thing. I mean, I knew this was going to happen because I've been on the internet in the 6 years since this was released, so I knew this was coming. I just thought it might have a bit more explanation behind it. Despite my best instincts telling me that maybe we should either leave Joseph there or just pop a bullet in his head and then escape, we for some reason take the nutter with us to seek shelter in Dutch's bunker from the start of the game, a character I'd completely forgotten about because he just pops up on the radio every now and then, and I don't think anyone else ever mentions him. We dodge flying debris while the passengers get very Bill Paxton in the back seat.
We're some real pretty shit now, man!
We eventually crash and black out and wake up handcuffed to a bed with Joseph telling us that we are all he's got now because we've killed his family, and the screen fades to black. Now, I know that Far Cry New Dawn is a direct sequel, but it is one I haven't played yet, so maybe this whole thing will be explained a bit there, but I did find the ending to be very unexpected. Don't get me wrong, I thought it was a really good ending, with a cinematic escape through the imminent apocalypse and some very powerful visuals with all those mushroom clouds going off around us. And this is definitely a marked improvement for me than the endings of Far Cry 4 and Primal. I mean, I had no doubt that this was the end of the game this time. While I did enjoy this ending, there were a couple of points where I really would have liked the option to just pull out a gun and end Joseph, just like we got to do with Pagan Min at the end of 4. The story overall works well for this game too, in my opinion, and the main antagonists are varied enough from each other and, to my mind, very well portrayed, each offering their own flavour of sinister and general nastiness. Though I do wish Faith was explored a bit more as a character, as towards the end of her boss fight she starts to panic and drops her normally calm and gentle facades to talk about how dangerous Joseph is and how she was 17 when they first met and he kept her drugged and threatened her into doing what she's currently up to. I do have a problem with that boss fight in particular because it's all done in a drug-induced vision, including her death scene, so was it even real? Did she even die? It's the same with any of the drug vision boss fights throughout the series since Far Cry 3. How much of them are real? What was Faith actually doing when we saw her levitating and firing energy balls at us? What were we actually doing when it looked like 10 of us were shooting a shirtless Joseph Seed with various different rifles for several minutes? This is a Far Cry game, and according to the scripture laid out by Far Cry 3, we need some drug scenes, but I'm kinda tired of those now, especially in this game as it comes up so much as part of the main narrative. Sometimes it is explicitly shown what your real world consequences are for what you've done during your trip, but other times I'm left wondering what I'd actually done, or whether I'm now psychic or able to project my vision to see other things happening. After each herald is killed, we're shown Joseph monologuing about their deaths. He can't be talking to us because we're not there, so this makes another series first of the player seeing something which our characters cannot be seeing. So, drug hallucinations and an unbelievable desire to keep the player character alive aside, I did enjoy the narrative in this game. We had what I found to be convincing villains with enough to keep me motivated to making sure they're all dead. I found the friendly characters to be largely forgettable though because they are so numerous and, like I said, they're only present for about a third of the game, meaning they essentially cease to exist once you complete their relevant districts. I probably shouldn't have encouraged people to skip that much of the video, that's a big old chunk right there. Anyway, that should be all the major spoilers covered, but I do want to touch on how the structure of the narrative affects the gameplay, because to my mind it's a pretty important factor to consider when discussing this game. So a general feeling I got from this one is that Ubisoft were trying to revitalize the series, do something a bit different with it rather than just doing Far Cry 3 again. Despite never being an annual release, Ubisoft made a point of saying that there would be no new Far Cry in 2017, which was similar to their Assassin's Creed announcement for 2016 while they spent time changing the style of that game for Assassin's Creed Oranges. Assassin's Creed Origins, which I made a video about, go watch it and get angry in the comments, thank you very much. Without stating it, the implication here is that they wanted to spend more time on the next Far Cry to make it more than just a sequel.
Something similar, but with just enough novelty to justify the cost.
And to be fair, I did notice their attempts to do so, with this open approach to narrative being one of the biggest indicators of that. So like I said earlier, the game is split into 3 districts, each with their own characters and stories, and you can approach any of these in any order at any time, marking a first for the series in that the entire map is open to you from the start, completely free from restrictions. I mean, there is a sort of fog of war effect on the map that conceals more specific details, but you can see all the roads and buildings on there right from the off. On one hand, this is great because it lets the player tackle the game in any order they fancy. Our good buddy Dan Hay expressed an interest in creating what he calls an anecdote factory, where any 2 players could start in the same spot but go off in completely different directions and have wildly different experiences, and this system allows for that. However, letting the player go anywhere means the player could go anywhere before they've unlocked the more powerful guns, or any new skills, or before having really gotten to grips with the systems in the game. You can't even carry 4 weapons on you until you are at least 1/3 of the way through the game. So every part of Hope County available on the open world map, by which I mean not including scripted missions, has to be accessible and conquerable by fresh new players. Outposts make their return for Far Cry 5. These are encounters on the open world map that have several enemies hanging around a group of buildings. There are alarms that can be disabled to prevent reinforcements showing up, and most of them will have a mix of general grunts, snipers, and heavy weapons chaps knocking around. These do not get any more difficult as the game progresses, because there is no linear path of completion, so they have to be easy enough that lower level players can reasonably beat them. Now, I'm not saying that these are all a cakewalk from the very start. If you stroll into one of these places with a pistol and an assault rifle with a minimal ammo capacity, you're probably going to have a bad time. But then again, all of the various takedown styles are available to you right from the start, and once you do unlock the extra weapon slots and get yourself a shotgun and maybe a grenade launcher, these outposts do not get any more challenging. Far Cry 3 and 4 had entire second areas that unlocked admittedly far too late in their games, which introduced more powerful and more numerous enemies to the outposts. That doesn't happen here though, meaning the difficulty curve flattens out very early into the game. The annoying thing for me is that I feel this could have been addressed pretty straightforwardly. Well, I mean, I don't know how to code, so I'm not sure how straightforward it is, but I feel like there's an obvious solution to this. Have the enemies scale dependent on how many districts you have liberated. You kill one herald and the other 2 will beef up their security, send out more helicopters, or just notice you more easily. Then ramp them up even more after the second herald dies, but obviously only in the areas that you haven't liberated. This would create more of a sense of progression, a sense that you're actually having an effect on these people and they're reacting to you. To balance this out, you could have each district linked to an enemy element, like say Faith with Bliss or Jacob with some sort of special forces unit. Once you kill them, you remove that element from the other areas, but you'll still get generally more difficult enemies in unliberated zones. On the subject of defeating the heralds, there is an element of the game that I really didn't enjoy during my first failed playthrough, but I can at least appreciate now. In a mechanic that reminds me of Just Cause 2, each district has a chaos meter, which I think is called something else, but you fill this up by doing missions, destroying cult stuff, and other such things like that. At certain levels of filling this meter, you'll trigger a goon squad to be dispatched to bring you in, which in practice means that while you're commuting to whatever mischief you've got planned for the afternoon, you'll be jumped by some baddies and tranquilized. That actually sounds pretty cool, and I didn't mind it up until the exact same thing happened to me as the first time I played, and I think in a very similar part of the map. I was in a plane, oh yeah, there's planes now, I'll get more into them later. I was in a plane soaring high above the ground. Jacob Seed pops up on my radio and tells me that he's gonna bring me in for a chat, and that he sent out a squad to capture me. That's fine, I'm thousands of feet in the air. Come on and step to me fam, see what happens bruv. Somehow though, I am almost instantly hit with a tranquilizer round, causing me to black out and wake up tied to a chair in a dark room. How the hell did I get hit with that tranquilizer? How did I get out of the plane without crashing into the side of a mountain? This exact same thing literally happened on both of my playthroughs, so this can't be some obscure random chance event. This particular example does make it feel incredibly intrusive, but I appreciate the system they're going for with this. Each herald is the big dog. You are in their yard pissing on their chips. Why would they sit patiently and wait for you to come and kill them? They want to see you on their terms, and I quite like that as an idea for a mechanic. I just think the execution was off in a couple of instances. On the flip side though, Faith's ones are completely different. You'll think you're saving a hostage or something like that until they explode into a cloud of drugs. In her district as well, animals will also turn out to be other things. I really quite like that stuff, and I wish there was a bit more of it. It's kind of like Mimics, but through a drug-addled redneck filter. Like I said, this game feels like it's making an effort to be more than just another sequel to Far Cry 3, and for the most part I do think it succeeds in that. Yes, there are still plenty of similarities, we can tell that this is a Far Cry game, but many of these have been tweaked and adjusted, and some systems have been thrown out and replaced altogether. First of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Oh wait, sorry, that was the last game. Okay, let's address the beautiful graphics in the room and outside the room and all around you at pretty much any point while you are playing this game, because this is a noticeable step up from Far Cry 4 in terms of graphics. I said in my last video that Primal was the first time during this playthrough of the series that I found myself stopping to just look at my surroundings, and that happened here even more frequently. Now, I can't be sure, but I believe that part of the reason I found myself just appreciating how good this game looks is because Ubisoft seemed to have gone to great lengths to ensure that our view of these beautiful vistas is as clear as possible, as we have the most minimal UI in the series, other than Far Cry 2, obviously. There is no minimap, with this instead being replaced with a Skyrim-esque compass at the top of the screen. Highlighted map points or quest objectives will have little icons that float around the edge of your monitor, and ammo counters will fade into existence whenever you start doing anything with your gun, but the majority of your screen is kept clear and free of clutter. You can even press a button to holster your weapon, giving you a full unobstructed view when you're just cutting across a cow field or whatever it might be. However, something I realised while putting together my last video and now can't stop thinking about is the lack of different weathers in this series. And I do still think that the lack of a dynamic weather system is such a missed opportunity that it's gone over the neighbour's fence and broken their conservatory roof. What especially hurts about this is a snippet from a Ubisoft video that was made to celebrate Far Cry 5's 5th anniversary.
Oh, rainwater drainage, don't get me started. This is extremely important, you know, like we have a saying, everything must flow. So if rainfall falls somewhere on the mountains, even if it's a Far Cry world, it needs to drain and it needs to follow the shapes of the terrain. And if it hits a road, there needs to be a culvert. No, that's really important. We gotta, everything has to drain.
They took rainfall into consideration when designing the world, but didn't put any rain in? Jesus, dude, don't blue balls me like that. Just give us some dynamic weather effects. We had it in Far Cry 2. You've even included a photo mode. Just let me take moody, rainy shots of your beautiful landscape. All that said, better graphics in a newer game are hardly unexpected developments, so what else is different here? Well, along with the minimap, this also marks the first entry in the series where the map is fully uncovered right from the start, as we've already talked about, and there are no towers or tower substitutes to climb or complete in order to find more quests or places of interest. I guess Ubisoft were sick of people making jokes about their precious towers, which to be fair had been included in more and more games since they themselves introduced them in the first Assassin's Creed game 11 years prior to the release of this one. There are still a few towers to climb, but these are parts of quests, and this does beg the question, how does the player discover more missions and side quests if there are no towers to reveal these things to them? And this is yet another change that I didn't really appreciate on my first playthrough, but found myself quite enjoying this time round. Like in Far Cry 4 and Primal, while you're out and about exploring, you will come across some baddies, who are called Peggies, by the way. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. The name comes from Project Eden's Gate, P-E-G, Peg, Peggies. But that sounds too much like a cute term for a sex act that I'm not sure I'm allowed to discuss on YouTube, and as such I had trouble taking them seriously. But anyway, the Peggies will be pegging around the map, pecking people against their will, and you can step in and rescue these poor souls. More often than not, the grateful rescued folk will tell you about something going on in the area. It could be the location of an enemy outpost, or another character who will have some side missions for you, or a prepper stash you can steal some supplies from. Don't worry, I'll come back to those. This doesn't just come from rescued people either. You could bump into someone who's out hunting, or just taking a walk along a mountain trail, and they'll point you towards something you could be getting up to. I guess you could call it a word of mouth system, where you explore the world and speak to people and they tell you where the action is. I think my initial issue with this system is that it very quickly loads up your world map with icons, and it could start to feel pretty overwhelming for some people. Like, I only wanted to go and try this fishing minigame, but now I've been told about one outpost, 2 different people that need help, and a stash of ammo that I should be looking out for. If you can just mentally file all of that stuff into the "it's there for me to do if I ever want to" section of your brain, then I think it's easier to appreciate this system for what it is, at least in my opinion, which is a more natural way of discovering the vast amount of content that this game has to offer. And I guess these prepper stashes are the closest thing to those towers from the olden games that we have in Far Cry 5. I mean, they don't reveal anything on the map, but they are all over the place and they are all unique, usually requiring some very basic puzzle solving in order to reach the stash of goods. And reach the stash of goods you should, because these things are an excellent source of money and perk points, which brings us on to another major change for the series. In the 3 games we've had so far that feature skills, we've had 3 different styles of skill tree. Far Cry 3 split your skills into, appropriately, 3 different categories. Far Cry 4 had 2 different sections, and Far Cry Primal was a fucking mess. One of the complaints I have long held against skill trees is that very often they require you to spend skills on things that you don't really want or need in order to get to the juicy stuff that you're looking forward to. And this is the part where Far Cry 5 kicks the door down, saunters up to the bar, drops trow and whops his perk list onto the countertop for all to see, stunning onlookers and causing the easily distressed to faint in amazement. Alright, I mean, it's not that great, but for my money, this is the best method of unlocking skills in the series so far. Apart from skills related to buddies you can later recruit and 1 or 2 other exceptions, every perk is unlocked and ready for activation from the get-go. I mentioned earlier that several actions which had to be unlocked in previous games, like all the different takedowns or skidding, are part of your moveset by default, and other than 1 or 2 skills like health bar increases or gun holsters, no perks have a prerequisite before they are available to acquire. Other than their perk point cost, obviously, you can't have everything handed to you. Now, this is where I can see some people having a problem with this system, and obviously I can only speak on this from my experiences with the game. There is no XP in Far Cry 5. These aren't skill points like what your grandma's Far Cry had. This is a perk list that requires perk points. There's a list of challenges in the menu. Challenges like kill 100 people with a rifle, or skin a bear, or drive so many miles with a truck, basic stuff like that, but also some slightly more challenging things. Complete a challenge and you'll get some perk points. There are also magazines scattered around the world which immediately give you 1 perk point each, and each prepper stash has 3 of these things lying around. Personally, I never once had to go out of my way to complete these challenges, and just by playing around with different weapons for funsies, found myself regularly forgetting to check on my perk points and then discovering that I had 20 or 30 of them just waiting to be spent. Like I said, in my humble and often distressing opinion, this is the best system in the series so far for this, because it lets you unlock the skills you actually want without forcing you into a linear progression of unlocks to get to the good stuff. Those buddy skills that become available later literally just lower their cooldown periods, so I never bothered with those. I will say that I do think only making the 4th gun holster perk available after killing one of the heralds is a bit of an odd decision. You have to get a third of the way through the game before you can equip a full loadout, and even then that dedicated sidearm slot returns for Far Cry 4, which I already bitched about in that video, but as a quick summary, I think it's a needless limitation on what loadout we can set ourselves up with. Another series staple that has been shaken up quite significantly is hunting animals to craft bags. No need for that, this is America, there's perks that give you bigger bags. But also, because this is America, there's plenty of hunting to be done, which is a purely optional activity now, and as far as I can tell, serves only as a means of making money and to unlock some specific perk points. A couple of quests do require it, and that's really the only time I took part in this. Not because of any moral objection or anything like that, but just because I found it tedious and a bit dull, and I was making enough money through finding prepper stashes and completing side quests. There is a pretty fleshed out fishing minigame here, which is either a terrible system that just doesn't work, or I suck so hard at it that the whole thing feels broken. Any of the fishing tips online would tell you just to activate a certain perk and get a better rod, but again, I didn't find the money worth the effort of waggling my mouse around like a twat. I mean, I've got a rifle and some grenades here. Are you sure I can't bring in some fish using those? Now, admittedly, this is possibly due to me spending less time crouched in the woods hunting, but I found that random animal attacks, arguably a series staple at this point, to be almost non-existent in this game. I had a couple of snakes jump out of the grass at me, but they seem to have removed the QTEs for animal attacks, and even the animation for eagle strikes. On that note, another series first is the health bar and healing system. Crafting is still present here, but it's incredibly stripped back and only used for a small handful of temporary stat boosts, and is something I repeatedly forgot about and basically just didn't interact with at all because I never felt the need for any of it. But there are no craftable medkits here. You can only find them out in the world occasionally, or you can buy them. And the health bar in another series first is one big bar that slowly regenerates, with a medkit giving it an immediate boost. What this means is that an actual series staple, the thing that people make compilation videos of for every release, the grotesque and uncomfortable healing animations are no more. They got rid of the gliders for 4, and now they got rid of the healing animations? What even is this game anymore? I mean, not really, this is hardly a deal breaker or a game-ending omission or anything, but this is one of the things that the series is known for, and it's odd that they chose to remove these altogether. I have no idea if these return in the other 2 games, but for now, please join me in a moment of silence for digital wince-inducing animations. Anyone who's watched any of my other Far Cry videos, which should be all of you because my mom assures me that they are wonderful, will hopefully remember my opinion on what makes a Far Cry game a Far Cry game. In my opinion, that is several systems that operate independently from each other but overlap regularly, leaving players with unique and memorable scenarios that would be almost impossible to replicate. Our old buddy Dan Hay even said as much earlier about wanting to make Far Cry 5 an anecdote machine, so I guess I should start calling it that so that I can sound like I know what I'm talking about. Far Cry 5 certainly has plenty of systems just going about their business that you can get involved with while you're out exploring the world. There are trucks with captives for you to free, supply vehicles for you to blow up, high-ranking bad guys to take out, and trucks with usually decent weapons to hijack. In my humble and medically concerning opinion, Far Cry 5 is possibly the best game in the series so far in terms of minute-to-minute gameplay. They have been honing this since Far Cry 2, making tweaks and adjustments in every game, and it is my opinion that the time spent between missions in Far Cry 5 is superior to all the others that have come before it. Now that you've picked up your chair from the other side of the room and finished posting your hate speech riddled comments, let me elaborate on that point. And to do so, we need to start talking about the guns. Roll the montage. Other than Primal, I think it's a fairly uncontroversial statement to say that the shooting feels pretty good in Far Cry games, and for my money this continues in Far Cry 5. I do have some negatives about the guns though before we get stuck into all the positivity, and we all know that being negative about a game gets you more views anyway. For a game set in the United States of America, I was a bit disappointed at the range of weaponry on offer. This is mostly all pretty standard stuff, and many of these guns have already been seen in the series. Handguns, assault rifles, shotguns, snipers, bow and arrow, all of them are just as good as they are in the other games, which is obviously a positive because to my mind the shooting has always felt satisfying in this series. Though I do think the shotguns sound a bit weaker in this entry, which is a disappointment. There are a couple of odd weapons on offer though, like a shovel launcher and a sci-fi force push weapon of some sort, which felt a bit out of place tonally, but I've got a whole spiel about the tone coming up later, so I'll come back to that. A couple of significant additions to the guns in this game are the alternate firing modes and ammo types. Guns can be fully customized just like in the last couple of games, and the alternate firing mode allows to, say, attach a sniper rifle onto an assault rifle and swap to a semi-automatic firing for long-range combat. I really enjoyed this option and I used this quite a bit. I can't say the same about the alternate ammo types though, which I didn't bother with, except for that rocket launcher which you can fill with cluster bombs. Watching that was a thing of beautiful brutality. Other than that, I never felt the need to equip different ammo types, as in the time it would take me to reload my shotgun with armor-piercing rounds, I could have emptied my loads all over that guy's helmet and started reloading like I normally would anyway. I'm sure people can get very clever with that system, but I never felt the need or desire to engage with it, so feel free to engage with it as much or as little as you like. Another puzzling decision for this game related to guns is to make the starting rifle arguably the best one in the game. All of these guns have stats as per usual, and the one you are given at the start is overall, to my mind, the best one. It has alternate firing modes that can just as easily be used as a sniper or assault rifle. You unlock new weapons by liberating more areas, and the next several rifles you unlock are all semi-automatic, which is not what I was looking for. I've got sniper rifles for that sort of stuff. This is America. Where's my gosh darn assault rifles? There's a similar issue with the prestige weapons on offer. These are uncustomizable but high-spec variants of existing guns, but they are all available to purchase from the very start of the game. That means that with just a little bit of money management, you can very quickly have access to the best weaponry in the game, giving you nothing to look forward to or to work towards for the rest of your 20 or 30 or so hours of playtime. Now, I'm a cynical bastard, and I think the reason this decision was made can be blamed on the premium currency available through microtransactions, and I'm going to touch back on that later because I was supposed to be explaining why this game is the best in the series when you're between missions. The game looks fantastic, the shooting feels great, and there's a heap of systems playing out that can overlap and throw you into a gun battle when you're least expecting it. I found that this game provided me with so many more unscripted gun battles than any of the other games in the series, and quite often on a much larger scale. Take one early instance when I was trying to blow up a convoy of trucks. Some of the guys jumped out to try and kill me, as seems reasonable, I've just been taking shots at them. As I'm taking cover to reload, an enemy helicopter just hovers by and joins in the fight. Now I'm in a pitched street battle, taking cover from multiple sources while trying to headshot the pilot, eventually bringing him crashing down into the nearby tree line. Another instance, much later in the game, saw me hiking over a hill with my buddy when an enemy plane started strafing us. I sprinted up to a clearing and lined up my shot, waiting for him to swing back round, and in a shot that felt like that one cutscene from Metal Gear Solid 5, landed a shot right between his eyes, bringing his plane down in an explosive inferno with a shot that would make the end proud. The way you uncover new missions and side activities to complete, like the over-the-top races that unlock new vehicles, rewards your exploration of this vast world and means that there is almost always going to be something somewhere, no matter which way you're heading. I also like the adjustments to being spotted by enemies when you're out on the road. The detection meter will often almost completely fill up when you pass a truck full of enemies, but rarely fully, not unless you start dicking around in front of them. I really felt an added tension when exploring unliberated areas, with constant Peggy patrols on the roads and roaming helicopters and planes looking for trouble from afar. I feel like this really nails the sense of being an intruder in someone else's territory. I found the vehicles great fun to drive as well, just as much fun as I had in 3, simultaneously feeling like you'll spin out on a corner but usually being able to just about hold on to it and keep on trucking. The range of vehicles here is huge too, from cars and quads to vans and bloody great big rig things with machine guns. We had a gyrocopter in 4, but now we've got actual helicopters with weapons attached and planes that can drop bombs and shoot missiles in dogfights. I will say though, I'm not the biggest fan of how the helicopters control, at least with the mouse and keyboard. Your pitch seems to be completely independent to your movement and has no effect on it, meaning I could just pitch right forward to machine gun some dickheads on the ground while not moving at all, making me think of that stupid shot in the Book of Boba Fett. Like, there's gravity on a planet, how is he hovering there when all of his engines are on the back of that thing? The final thing that I felt really elevated the exploration side of things is the updated buddy system. So in 4 we could spend points to call in an AI buddy, and in Primal we could tame animals that can be summoned at will. This time we can just walk up to a dude or dudette with a gun or bow and arrow or whatever and get up to 2 of them to tag along with us. They can have different weapons, making them more suitable for different scenarios, and they'll stick close to you, sneaking when you sneak and such, and can be directed around the battlefield with basic commands. Apparently if they get enough kills they unlock new abilities, but I never got them that far because I spent most of my time with one of the 9 elite operatives that are shown on your map calling out for your help, and you need to go and help to bail them out. The first one I found was a dog who will tag nearby enemies for you. There's a sniper lady called Grace I used a lot in the early game. There's a dude keen on flamethrowers. Herc gets upgraded from being a DLC character to carrying rocket launchers. There's a guy with a plane, a gal with a helicopter, and among others is a bear who has the special ability of being a fucking bear. These guys are great and can be summoned in an instant, and each of them bring their own unique strengths and abilities to a fight. I will say there's nothing quite like storming a base with a helicopter at your side, raining down a shower of bullets while you and your dog buddy tear through the survivors. And they also give you the opportunity to be revived if you get killed, which is pretty handy when you're dicking around. I do wish that their unlockable perks did more than just reduce their cooldown periods though. Like, give them new abilities or weapons or something. Let me strap a rocket launcher onto that bear. There are a couple of fairly consistent niggles that I had throughout my time with Far Cry 5, which by no means put me off playing it or anything, but I do feel like they're worth bringing up. One of these is the microtransactions that I mentioned earlier regarding the premium currency. Full disclosure, I think premium currencies and microtransactions in general are evil and there is no reasonable excuse for them. Unless the game is free to play, obviously, but even then, I have strong opinions. I'm not going to go into a full rant about it here. If you want that, please go and watch my videos on either Assassin's Creed Origins, Odyssey, or Valhalla, because Far Cry 5 is not nearly bad enough that it justifies a full-on little nerd rage. But I do think that they needed something to tempt people into purchasing the premium currency here, which is why the weapons progression system is basically non-existent, as the top-end weapons are available to buy right from the off. Also, premium currency means that they would have toned down the free currency rewards for quests, again to encourage you to pay for the premium to get what you want quicker. And I was kinda sick of every safe in the game, without exception, containing exactly $250. That's a big safe, fill that thing up, at least put a gun in there or something. The other very noticeable thing for me was the inconsistent tone of the game. As a reminder, this is a game about a doomsday cult that decorates their outposts with corpses that have been gutted, stuffed full of drugs, and strung up with barbed wire. All of the interactions with the cult during cutscenes and missions is very serious and straight-faced, but then you'll get a mission where you lure drugged up zombie-like enemies to you by playing Disco Inferno over the speakers. One operative mission sees us help our buddy getting revenge on a bloke who chops off the fingers of parents and feeds them to their kids, whose lair is littered with strung up and impaled corpses of those who dared to defy him, and we see him burning someone to death. But the next minute, we're encouraging a couple of cows to get it on so that we can harvest their testicles for a testicle festival, which isn't what you think, Mom, honest. There's also a couple of bits of dialogue which seem like the developers complaining about making this game. I mean, one of them is about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the ghoulies.
Can't go back to working on shit like Far Cry. I'd rather put my balls in a vice and listen to everyone with their fucking opinions about world building and player motivation and believability.
But the other one is a bit more subtle and seems to me like the developers poking fun at the publishers who thought some cosmetic changes would be enough for a new game.
I'm just ready to move on to a new adventure. Something similar, but with just enough novelty to justify the cost.
I don't know, I stopped thinking about it once that guy vaporized himself and left us with his sci-fi gun that I never used. It's just weird, and I imagine people would say that this would fall into that Marvelization of media where everything has to have funny, light-hearted moments in it. I don't know enough about that sort of thing to comment, but I would say that the jumping between tones felt odd, and especially with the arcade mode being there, all of the wacky stuff could have been kept entirely separate from the main game. Then again, I am a miserable bastard, so think of that what you will. Like I said at the start, I barely touched the arcade mode because that sort of stuff is just not for me. The idea of playing levels created by people who aren't level developers just doesn't seem like an appealing prospect to me, and instead feels like it was included just so people would share their creations on social media and provide free, lasting marketing for the game. Similarly, I also have no interest in the DLC for this game because I've seen that it's just arcade mode content made by the actual developers, but it's completely unrelated to the main game. I also can't speak for the co-op once again, which at least seems like it's drop-in and pretty seamless. My wife enjoyed Far Cry 4 and is keeping an eye out for this one to go on sale so that we can have a go at the co-op, but until then I can't speak about it. All of this barely coherent rambling about a 6-year-old game gives the impression of an aging franchise trying to reinvent itself, to give itself a new lease on life. In many ways it's successful, and I would say that it is a noticeable improvement, but in other ways it's just forcing some elements in an attempt to stay relevant to a younger audience. Basically, this feels like Far Cry's midlife crisis. The positive gameplay changes would be the cool car or motorbike that they buy, because those are actually cool things, but the lack of progression, microtransactions, conflicting tone, and pushing player-created content every 10 minutes or so
Check it out! This game lets you build your own levels.
feels like the already out-of-date haircut and the attempt to start using current slang, which is so not demure and chuggy, no cap skibbity, beta riz. Which leaves me with the final task at long bloody last of deciding where I'm going to put this thing in my ranking. This series has made me wish I was a bit more of a coward and started a tier list rather than a definitive ranking, because this is starting to get difficult. So far, I haven't felt that any of these games are bad at all, and most of them are different enough from each other that they all do some things better than the others. I still think I enjoyed Far Cry 3 more overall than this, and for anyone who hasn't watched my Far Cry 3 video, that's not a nostalgia thing talking. I couldn't even get the fecking thing to work for years for some reason, so I barely remembered any of it when I played it recently. Given the choice, I think I'd still pick Far Cry 2 over this because that thing is just so unique and certainly doesn't have any tonal issues. But would I pick this over Far Cry 4? Well, this is going to upset a lot of people, and I'm sorry for that, but yes I would. Believe me, I was not expecting to. I thought the series would be all downhill after 4, and I've played 4 the most out of any of the games in the series, but I ended up really enjoying this one. Far Cry 5 had more time to reflect on what has worked in the series so far and made several changes for the better, and in my opinion as an overall package is an experience that I would choose to spend my time with over Far Cry 4. If it helps, I will be in trouble with the missus for that when she sees this because 4 is her favourite. So now all the Far Cry 4 fans have unsubscribed and left their hate comments, we could all look forward to playing Far Cry New Dawn, the first entry in the series that I have never played, even a little bit. This is another one that I remember got a lot of abuse when it came out, but now opinion seems to have shifted a little bit, and I've seen more than a few people speaking quite highly of it. So I'm quite looking forward to playing this one myself and putting everyone else right with the only opinion that matters, mine. Thank you so much for making it this far. If you're still here, please do subscribe if you got here without tearing your ears off. That only seems fair, and it really does help out a lot. And so does leaving a like, and that's an even easier thing to do. I am incredibly grateful for all the support and kind comments that people are leaving on these videos. It really does help, and I really do appreciate it. It really is surprising what difference a few kind words can make when I'm feeling unmotivated. Then again, I also really appreciate the negative comments because it still increases visibility for the video, and at least I made you feel something enough to make you want to write a note to a stranger on the internet. Once again, channel memberships are now live for anyone who wants to see these videos a week earlier than all the freeloading plebs and get your name shouted out at the start of the video. Or if you want a free shout out, go and follow the instructions on the wall of text at the top of this video. And now, like all good entertainers, I'll close things out with a joke. I call my car the Pussy Wagon because it's where I go to cry.
Nothing sexual. Good.